One unexpected comment, one awkward reaction, and suddenly the entire basketball world was arguing about Caitlin Clark again. It happened live on national television during a broadcast that was supposed to be about basketball analysis. A simple question, a surprising answer, and a 2-second reaction from Clark that the internet refused to let go of. NBA legend Reggie Miller was asked which NBA player Caitlin Clark reminded him of. Everyone expected the obvious names: Stephen Curry, Luka Doncic, Damian Lillard. Those comparisons had followed Clark throughout her entire rise. They made sense. They matched the level of attention she had already generated. Instead, Miller paused and said, "Payton Pritchard." The studio went quiet for a split second, and Clark's reaction said everything. She didn't argue. She didn't challenge him. She simply gave a surprised smile, glanced sideways, and tried to move on. But in today's sports media world, moments like that don't disappear. They explode. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Fans slowed it down, zoomed in, replayed it frame by frame. Some thought it was funny, others thought it was awkward, but a massive number of people believed they had just witnessed something else entirely: disrespect. And then Dan Patrick decided to confront Miller about it directly. What happened next made the entire controversy even bigger. To understand why this moment blew up the way it did, you have to understand where Caitlin Clark was at this point in her career. She wasn't just another rising talent entering the spotlight. She had already become a cultural phenomenon. Record-breaking scoring numbers, historic college performances that outperformed major professional sporting events in viewership, arenas selling out weeks in advance, opposing teams moving games to larger venues just to accommodate the crowds that showed up when Clark came to town. The phrase Caitlin Clark effect had stopped being a media talking point and started being a measurable business reality. Merchandise sales climbing, television ratings surging, millions of new fans discovering women's basketball for the first time, and staying. That kind of impact changes expectations. When fans talked about Caitlin Clark, they weren't just discussing a basketball player anymore. They were discussing someone who had already changed the visibility of an entire sport. Someone who had broken scoring records that stood for decades. Someone whose name was being mentioned in the same conversations as the most iconic figures in basketball history. So when Reggie Miller reached for a comparison and landed on Payton Pritchard, the gap between expectation and reality was enormous. Pritchard is a solid, respected NBA guard, skilled player, works hard, but he isn't the type of name that comes to mind when discussing generational influence. He isn't a superstar. He isn't a household name outside of dedicated NBA circles. And to many fans, that gap felt like more than just a questionable basketball opinion. It felt like a downgrade. Once the moment started circulating, the reaction multiplied instantly. Basketball accounts reposted it. Fan pages clipped Clark's reaction and zoomed in on every detail. Commentators uploaded breakdown videos. People who hadn't even watched the broadcast suddenly found themselves watching the clip on a loop, trying to figure out what Clark was actually thinking. That's what made this moment so powerful. The mystery. Clark's reaction wasn't angry. It wasn't confrontational. It was subtle. A quick smile, a slight pause, a sideways glance. And then she moved on. To some viewers, that looked like someone trying to stay professional in an awkward situation. Others believed it was the kind of smile people give when they hear something unexpected, but don't want to make a scene. A few fans thought she looked like she was quietly thinking the exact same thing millions of people were already saying online. Nobody actually knew, and that mystery kept the clip alive long after it should have faded. Comment sections exploded. Sports talk shows picked it up. Podcasts dedicated entire segments to debating whether Miller's comparison made sense. Even casual fans who had never closely followed Clark were suddenly hearing about the controversy. Some defenders jumped in quickly. They argued Miller was being taken completely out of context, From a pure style of play standpoint, both Clark and Pritchard share real similarities. Both shoot confidently from deep range. Both handle the ball comfortably for long stretches. Both have the kind of fearless trigger that lets them launch shots without hesitation when the clock is running down. From that perspective, the comparison wasn't crazy. It was a basketball observation. But here's the problem with context in the modern media environment. Once a clip goes viral, context disappears. Short moments travel without explanation. Reactions get exaggerated, and in this case, the moment was just awkward enough to give the internet exactly what it wanted. A controversy. While the debate was still spreading everywhere, Dan Patrick decided to address it directly. Patrick has spent decades interviewing the biggest names in sports. He doesn't manufacture drama. He asks straightforward questions and lets people explain themselves. So when Miller appeared on his show, the topic was almost impossible to avoid. Patrick went back to the broadcast moment calmly and deliberately. He pointed out that the clip had generated significant attention online. He noted that fans were divided. Some thought Clark looked surprised. Others thought the comparison came across as dismissive. Then he asked the question everyone wanted answered. Did Reggie Miller realize how controversial that moment had become? Miller seemed slightly amused. He acknowledged that he had heard about the reaction. People had sent him the clip. Others had asked him about it directly. He knew exactly what was being said online. And then, instead of apologizing, he doubled down. Miller explained that the entire controversy had grown out of a misunderstanding. He wasn't comparing Clark's fame or legacy to Pritchard. He wasn't ranking their careers or suggesting they had the same level of influence. He was analyzing playing style, nothing more. When the question came up during the broadcast, Miller said he interpreted it specifically. Which NBA player does Clark remind you of in terms of how they play? Not popularity, not impact, just basketball. And when he thought about it from that narrow lens, Pritchard was the first name that came to mind. The fearlessness, the deep shooting confidence, the ability to create offense quickly without needing elaborate setups, the willingness to pull the trigger in moments when most players would pass. From Miller's perspective, those traits connected the two players directly. Patrick even joked that fans online had clearly been expecting a Steph Curry answer. That was the comparison people had already attached to Clark because of her shooting range. But Miller didn't seem interested in changing his answer to match expectations. Then Miller added something that reframed the entire conversation. He admitted that if the question had been phrased differently, his answer would have been completely different. If someone asked which superstar Clark's influence resembled, Curry would absolutely make sense. The shooting range alone justifies that connection. And then he went further. He started listing other players whose qualities he saw reflected in Clark's game. Stephen Curry for the deep shooting range, Kyrie Irving for the creative improvisation with the ball, Magic Johnson for the court vision and playmaking instincts, Isaiah Thomas for the fearless scoring mentality. In other words, Miller wasn't trying to reduce Clark to a single comparison. He was saying her game contains pieces from some of the most skilled players in basketball history. But by the time that explanation reached people, the viral clip had already done its damage, and viral moments rarely wait for full context. The first impression had already become the story. Here's what this entire moment actually revealed. It wasn't really about Payton Pritchard. It wasn't even about whether Reggie Miller's basketball analysis was correct. It was about something much bigger. Caitlin Clark's presence has changed how every conversation about basketball gets processed. Years ago, a quick player comparison during a broadcast would have disappeared before the next possession. Analysts make comparisons every single game. Most of them never get a second thought. But Caitlin Clark isn't a normal basketball story. Every comment about her carries weight now. Every moment involving her draws attention. Every opinion about her playing style triggers a reaction far larger than anyone expects. That's what the Reggie Miller controversy proved. Not that one comparison was right or wrong, not that Dan Patrick destroyed anyone or that Miller owed an apology. It proved that Clark has already reached a level where the basketball world is still figuring out how to talk about her, where even a genuine, well-intentioned observation from a respected NBA legend becomes a nationwide debate within minutes. That kind of influence doesn't arrive accidentally, and it doesn't disappear either. Did Reggie Miller actually disrespect Caitlin Clark? Or did the internet completely overreact to a simple basketball opinion? Drop your take in the comments. We read every single one. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more breakdowns on the biggest stories in basketball. We'll see you on the next one.